Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Ellen Fanning and we're in Melbourne, the city whose people suffered through the longest of lockdowns and which is now finding its way back, although much has changed here. We'll talk about last night's leaders' debate, how the local economy is coming back from the brink and what makes this city so livable. And joining me on the panel tonight, marketing strategist Toby Ralph is with us, lawyer and executive director of Victoria University's Zelman Centre, Nyadol Nyuon in the flesh, economics editor at The Age, Noel Towell, big welcome to The Drum, and host of the Not Good Enough podcast, Mitch Alexander. So wonderful to have you all here in person. And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag The Drum, and we're on Facebook. The Prime Minister and his opposite number were back on the campaign trail today. Scott Morrison in Longman in Queensland and Anthony Albanese in the seat of Gilmore in New South Wales. Both were tidying up the loose ends left from the night before. The first official debate of the campaign held in Queensland with questions from an audience of undecided voters. They'd traversed housing, health, China, border security and the NDIS, among other things. In the end, the Sky Host broadcaster called it a narrow win for Albanese, but still, there were a large number of undecided voters.
Foreign investment into the country, especially in the housing market, is actually driving the prices up.
I remember when Jenny and I bought our first house, it was 30 years ago. It was tough then, but I believe it's tougher now.
Some of the measures that the government have done are terrific. But we are missing out on bits too.
How are you going to get all these nurses in to do what you're saying in aged care, that is to have 24/7 care across every centre? How are you going to do it?
An anti-corruption commission at a Commonwealth or federal level has been described by some of the greatest legal minds in this country as a toothless tiger.
And also how you're going to help Australians get into electric vehicles.
When you were Deputy Prime Minister, why didn't you support turnbacks then?
You weren't proposing then. You were not proposing.
I'm sorry,
you were not
it was our
proposing.
policy.
Why is it, Scott, that you're always looking for a division, not looking for
No, I'm just
agreement.
looking for the accuracy and the truth.
Can you please tell me what the future of the NDIS looks like under your government?
Jenny and I have been blessed. We've got two children that haven't had to go through that. I can only try and understand your aspirations for those children.
Labor does the big reforms.
But it's always the Liberals and Nationals have to work out how to pay for these things.
Tonight, a huge development in terms of our foreign policy challenges with the Solomons signing this deal with China.
But the Chinese government has been seeking to coerce Australia. I was the one who called them out on the pandemic and was called a racist.
Have you taken China's side on this?
That's an outrageous slur from the Prime Minister.
Everybody at home's just seen the highlights of that debate. Here you are, four engaged people. Did any of you watch it? No?
No, Christ no.
No.
Well, like more than 99% of Australians, I gave it a miss last night and watched the best bits on replay this morning.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it was on pay-per-view for a lot of Australians. But no, I was interested to see the first question was on health or housing, and the second question was on health, and the third question was on the federal ICAC, and that they were questions that have been brought from that audience. What do you think that tells us about undecided voters?
I hope it tells us that voters are interested in substantive issues. They're not interested in who got the numbers wrong here and there. They're interested in knowing, what they're going to do with their lives in an economy that has been really, really challenged by COVID. They want to know about housing affordability. They want to know about national security in a more probably substantive way than some of the responses. I didn't watch it partly because I didn't think I was going to get anything out of it, to be honest. I think political discussions have become almost rehearsed, and especially with politicians nowadays, it's almost as if they have to say things a certain way, or if they get it wrong, the media cycle will start, and it sort of drain it of the curiosity, the interest. So I'll just wait to read and then look at it afterward instead of engaging in all that. Yeah.
Toby, I was interested to see the question of a commitment or otherwise to a federal anti-corruption body come up. How significant an issue do you see that?
It's significant to a lot of people who've made up their minds about how they're going to vote and are very engaged with politics. I suspect elections are all about swinging voters. Most swinging voters wouldn't vote if they didn't have to. And to them, politicians are a bunch of people in shiny suits who lie through their arse all day. So what they wanted, and so contemporary electioneering tends to be focused on persuading those people to despise the other guys more than they despise you. Federal ICAC is an important issue, but not to them. They're more concerned with the price of petrol or who's doing what to whom on Married at First Sight.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that kind of depressing? I mean, that you know, in a way it is, honestly. Like, ICAC to me is such an important issue because, and not because I'm necessarily entrenched politically, but I think it's such an important issue that goes to some of the problems that we have in our society, the problem about fairness, the idea that the group of people that brought us accountability by rubber debt, you know, kind of shrink at the idea of being held accountable, despite all the evidence of maybe not corruption, but all the bad behaviour we've seen come out of the, you know, politics over the last years. You know, that this will not be at the core of a particular interest. I mean, it's quite surprising to me, but it also shows almost a giving up in our society, a giving up for better standard, giving up for better, you know, giving up to have better politicians, to have a better system, to have a fairer system in place. So, I mean, it's really depressing to see politics just become like a bit of a game. And that's why I didn't watch, because it does feel like a game.
But I feel like, ironically, political corruption is what disengages a lot of people as well. Like, we are coming into this, especially with these debates right now, and treating Scott Morrison like he's a new contender. And it's that, like we've forgotten the last, 2 years especially, of everything is a rort of all types. I think that's why a federal ICAC has been such a big issue for at least engaged voters, because they've gone, this is ridiculous. But then when we talk about a federal ICAC, like at the debate, it's just a sort of ephemeral, trust in politics, blah, blah, blah. It's been an issue for a while, and the media has sort of dropped it, but I think the voters haven't. But the longer we don't have a systemic approach to dealing with corruption in politics, I think most people are going to look at politics and go, whatever, it's a bunch of crooks.
Chicken and egg, though, isn't it, Noel? Because maybe I'm reading too much into the facial expressions of the undecided voters who were there, but there were certain things that they were really engaged with. They were really reacting to affordable housing, housing for essential workers, affordable housing for essential workers who live closer to where they work, those sorts of issues. And yet on that one, they were just there was a sense of you need a federal ICAC to trust people. Do I trust either of what you know? See what I mean?
I do. I thought it was federal ICAC was part of a broader pattern. I thought of the 100 undecided voters that Sky News had assembled. In their questioning, they dragged those two leaders onto questions of substantive policy, where they didn't necessarily want to be. I got the sense that perhaps there would have been more in their comfort zone if they were simply allowed to recite their talking points or unleash their attack lines on each other, because that, up until now, has been where this campaign has been heading.
And I liked that about it. But they did get to the scares. One of them, Noel, was around China, the Beijing security deal with the Solomon Islands, and Labor, Albanese saying, look, it's happened on the Prime Minister's watch. It's a massive foreign policy failure. And the Prime Minister's response to attack Labor, saying you can't blame Australia for this. Why would you take China's side? Now, which was more convincing to you to hear as a voter?
Well, we've been watching this very closely for several years at my employer, The Edge. The coalition clearly thinks that the China attack on Labor, that Labor will be weak on China, will fail to stand up to China's aggression and bullying, resonates in the community, or at least certain the part of the community that they believe they need to win over to get over the line on May 21st. Now, but the issue is, and it's a risk, because there are a lot of voters, Australian voters of Chinese heritage, and my colleague Paul Sakal has been out in the eastern suburbs where there are three electorates in particular that both sides need to win, that are among the highest concentration of Chinese heritage Australians in the country, and they're not happy. They're really not happy with the way that the debate has been conducted. So, Coalition clearly thinks it's onto a winner. Labor is trying to neutralise it as much as possible and closing down that point of difference. And that's one of the major talking points. There is no difference in policy, but there's that underlying risk that you alienate a very important community in this country, and not just that particular community, but other minority communities.
We're talking about alienating part of community that a language that speak about the threat of China, that kind of language resonate with them. What we are also not focusing on is the other community that we're demonizing, right? Because that kind of, the lack of nuance in that kind of language does demonize Australians of Chinese heritage. And in fact, we've had in Australian Parliament where, a member of Parliament asked Chinese Australians or Australians of Chinese descent where their loyalty lies.
Wow.
So that question, having this discussion in that manner, where it's about just sort of getting the vote by making a certain group of people, scared, or they feel like they need to react, that kind of language, it lacks sufficient nuance to be able to provide protection, at least to Chinese Australians or Australians of Chinese descent who then are demonized as a consequence of politicians using this level of rhetoric. As we know, there's no sort of difference, foreign policy difference between Labor and the Liberal Party when it comes to China. So this idea that one is for China and the other is against it doesn't seem to really carry much water with me. The problem is that all this has been brought into tension by the Solomon Islands.
Yes.
And I don't think that's because, in my view, I just look at Solomon Islands as deciding what is in their best interest as a sovereign state, because the way Australia has treated Pacific nations with utter disrespect and just ignoring their interests sometimes when it comes to issues like climate change. In fact, laughing. Our former Prime Minister laughed, at the prospect of these countries losing their homes. Now we're going to turn around and act surprised that the Solomon Islands is not backing us? I mean, it seems obvious. If you're not going to treat your neighbours with respect. That's what's going to happen.
There's the issue on that as well. The thing that I was thinking about coming into this today was in 2019, not that long ago, the Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, told the Pacific Island nations not to worry about climate change because your workers come over and pick our fruit. And I'm sorry, if I'm a Pacific Island nation and I'm choosing between a country that says that and any other country that just doesn't say that, I'm going to go with another country.
At the same time, Toby, the point was made by government ministers today, and indeed by the Prime Minister. Should he not have offended Beijing by saying, well, gosh, maybe we should find out where COVID came from? Should we have not offended Beijing by saying, no, we're not going to answer to a series of demands that tell journalists not to report the truth, that tell academics not to conduct research that Beijing doesn't like? No.
There's a giant wrestling match going on in the world between democracy and autocracy. And for me, the China issue is vital to the future of the world and how we handle it. Once it becomes a component of a trivial election debate, and all electioneering is trivialised, once we do that, we demean the issue and we harm ourselves. I'm actually very offended that the China issue has become politicised. I think it's dangerous for the country. So I hope that stops, because it can damage us badly.
Well, the Prime Minister has been facing criticism after telling the mother of a boy with autism during last night's debate that he and his wife were blessed not to have a child with a disability. Some, including Liberal Senator Holly Hughes, who also has a son with autism, have been defending the PM today.
So recognition that we do have additional challenges. My son is a blessing, but I can tell you, as I said, there were days I did not feel particularly blessed. There were very, very challenging days. Find something of substance and stop focusing on a ridiculous notion that somehow or other the Prime Minister was in any way denigrating people with a disability or their families and the experiences they go through.
But we wanted to find out how others in the disability community took those comments, so we got in touch with some drum friends to hear what they had to say.
First response, my immediate response was a great big... that sense of tiredness, because this is all too common a response. I don't think it was malicious. It was thoughtless. It lacked empathy. It lacked understanding. It is reflecting this whole attitude of you are lesser. And for it to come from the leader of the country, ouch.
My heart fell, honestly. I mean, it was incredibly clumsy language, for one thing. I think it came from a place of seeing me and people like me as flawed, broken, and faulty, instead of having strengths and challenges. And in one fell swoop, no matter how well-meaning the Prime Minister's words were, he completely dismissed me and people like me as being broken.
It's a horrible thing for a person with a disability, and for children with a disability especially, to hear that they're blessed for not having a child that is like you. That is a dreadful thing to say. More broadly around that is that we don't deserve misplaced pity. And, I do consider myself to be blessed because my children are fantastic, disabled people who are, just proud of who they are, who are performing in life, and who are absolutely have the right to be part of this world.
We also heard from Australian of the Year Dylan Alcott, who tweeted this in response to the PM.
Woke up this morning feeling very blessed to be disabled. I reckon my parents are pretty happy about it too. Feeling sorry for us and our families doesn't help. Treating us equally and giving us the choice and control over our own lives does.
Since then, Scott Morrison has apologised.
I meant no offence by what I said last night, but I accept that it has caused offence to people, and Dylan and I have been in contact today, and I apologise directly to Dylan about that. I think people would also appreciate that I would have had no such intention of suggesting that anything other than every child is a blessing is true. Every single child is precious and a blessing to every single parent.
Mitch, this is interesting. The Prime Minister did say in his midday press conference that he was deeply sorry, and he said that several times. But earlier in the day, when he was talking to Ray Hadley on commercial radio, he was saying, look, this is, as if the issue had been politicised, and clearly no one, would really sort of take offence to that. I think it's an interesting opportunity to explore for the Australian community and have a debate that isn't political about how he gave offence. Just talk about that for me.
I think it comes from like Simon Birmingham's explanation afterwards as well, saying that he didn't mean any offence and he didn't mean to say that he's blessed not to have a child with any sort of disability.
But there are lots of Australians, who would say, I'm so glad I don't have a child with a disability, and would not think that that would give the offence we have just seen people talking in a heartfelt way about. So what they say when they say, I'm so glad, which is not necessarily what the Prime Minister said, but what they're saying is the medical model, that if you have autism, or if I'm Dylan Alcott, right, and I'm in a wheelchair, that I was a whole person, but somehow I'm broken. That's what that indicates, isn't it? Talk to me about what's the alternate way of seeing that, because you talk to uni students about this.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I taught for the longest time. It's just the social model, and it's the basic idea that society dictates what counts as a disability and therefore what counts as good and bad in terms of disabilities. We have access, most of us have access to, any sort of glasses or contacts or whatnot, and so being short-sighted or nearsighted doesn't present as a disability. If we did not have glasses, we wouldn't be able to get around, some of us wouldn't be able to get around society at all. We'd be dangerous in cars, we wouldn't be able to navigate anywhere, but we don't consider that a disability. And for Scott Morrison to say that he's being blessed, the explanation that came out was that it's not about the child themselves. He's blessed to not have to have dealt with the welfare system and trying to get support for a child with disability, which is absurd because he's the Prime Minister and more than any other Australian has the ability to rectify that being a blessing or a curse. he's the one in charge of that, and if he chose to, he's making a choice. If he chose to fix that, he could. He could make it a blessing or a curse, either sort of way.
Noel, there'll be a lot of people watching this who will take him at face value. I said this from a place of compassion. And perhaps part of what that's about is saying that someone with a disability is somehow broken, right? That it's a tragedy that Dylan Alcott is in a wheelchair. But Dylan Alcott doesn't see it that way. And so this has been a really interesting teaching moment, hasn't it, to say, he's not broken.
I think it has. And just go back to you, and Dylan Alcott is somebody who celebrates his disability, and ever since, you know, his retirement, that you know, high profile, emotional retirement from playing tennis at the highest level, I think, and the Australian of the Year award, of course, taught a lot of us to think anew about disability and the way we see the issue. We're just going back, if you don't mind, to the point you made that yes, many Australians might reflect that they are so glad that they don't have a child with a disability. Sure, you might say that, you might think that, but I personally would never dream of saying that to the parent of a disabled child. It would never cross my mind for a moment. And I think that's one of the things that perhaps has landed the Prime Minister in hot water, on top of all the things, the excellent points that Mitch has made. But let me just get a little bit political for a while, if you don't mind, because I thought it was absolutely fascinating that first thing this morning, Simon Birmingham was out saying, no, he didn't mean to say what he meant, and you've got it wrong, and let me just explain things to you. Then Holly Hughes was out in mid-morning, and then it was, she's not offended, and she's got a child who's got a disability. Okay. Then the Prime Minister is out. Not only is he doubling down and digging in, but the people who are criticising him, many of them, are doing it in bad faith. Right. So that's a reasonably aggressive response. Come noon, it's mea culpa, and I apologise, and let's just put this thing behind us. And I would just love to have been a fly on the digital wall for that conversation where somebody says, Scott, it's over. Pull it. All right. It's time to take your medicine, apologise, and try and put it behind you.
Till I heard that he changes his views from this is a bad faith attack to I'm actually sorry now. I was on the side that this was just, I didn't think that he meant offence. Speaking as a person with that disability, I thought he was trying to reach out, but his word failed him, and I thought that failure reflected most of, speaking for myself at least, the assumption that we tend to have in an able-bodied society, that being able-bodied is normal, therefore it's good, therefore it's blessed, right? So, and I've sort of engaged in conversations like that. So I was willing to see it from that perspective, and also I didn't think it was necessary to impose bad intent, because I think even the explanation that was given afterward again exposed the very nature of what the problem is, which is even our institutional response to support people living with disability fails them, and that's why we see sort of the NDIS as sort of a blessing not to deal with, when in fact what we need are policies in place that doesn't create an additional barrier for parents or for people living with disability to struggle with. But then when I hear that he changed his story, then that makes it a bit questionable. I think it would have been just useful for him to say, I used the long language, I'm sorry. I know I've used that. I've had conversations with my sister where we're talking about a friend whose child gets sick all the time, and we're talking about how lucky we were that our kids were healthy. I think that reflects the sort of unlearning we need to do as individuals, and maybe not focus on individual mistakes, but the continual institutional failure to respond to the needs of people living with disability.
So I think swinging voters will look at that and go, "Meh, it clearly wasn't intended to offend." So I don't think that'll be an issue in terms of swinging voters. You know, personally, I've been blessed not to have children. So,
I'm very offended by that.
So you've now offended everybody.
That's my job. But, you know, I mean, people on the spectrum have made a huge contribution to the world. Let's not forget, you know, we've got Michelangelo, Einstein, Wittgenstein, Emily Dickinson, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mozart, all the rest of it. I mean, there's been a great contribution made there. But going back to it, I don't think people will judge Scott harshly for that, not the swinging voter, and that's who this is about.
You're watching The Drama, and with me on the panel, marketing strategist Toby Ralph, lawyer and executive director of Victoria University's Zelman Centre, Nyadol Nyuon, economics editor at The Age, Noel Towell, and host of the Not Good Enough podcast, Mitch Alexander. You're not going to believe this. We are broadcasting today from Ballers Clubhouse. Can you say that on television? In the heart of Melbourne's Chinatown. It is a giant social club where beyond the usual bars and dining spaces, there are also things like ping pong tables and darts rooms. In other words, lots of adults packed into a big warehouse space playing games. So, of course, it was a concept that must have been hatched before COVID. It was all set to go just before the pandemic hit, but it only managed to open the doors after the first lockdown in May 2020. Then there was the record 111-day lockdown, so that this place has been closed more often than it's been open, a fate that mirrors the challenges of businesses across this city.
We've got shows happening and people are coming to shows. We've still got about a 30% no-show for people who are buying tickets. People are coming out on the weekends, but they're not so much during the week. So we're not through it by any means.
Especially with my last job, we finally got the order at your table things, which I found were quite helpful. It was a lot of short staffing coming back, and to deal with the amount of people that were coming in, like out of lockdowns, it was like a lot of stress on everyone.
We're definitely reaching sort of pre-pandemic levels. Without the density limits, people are very comfortable and keen to come back, so the confidence is definitely there, and we're busy and it's good.
Mitch, let's start with you. You think that the declaration that we're back to normal, you've had the Grand Prix, it's all ready to go, was a little bit premature in Melbourne?
Just a little bit, yeah. I think it was 50,000 cases just like yesterday or today. Yeah, I think the idea that we're back to normal is a political one. It's what Business Council of Australia are pushing for. Epidemiologists are not. And this disease, like COVID, is still relatively misunderstood. The short-term effects seem to be much milder with 3 doses of a vaccine, but there are long-term effects that we don't know about yet, and that's reflected in consumer confidence, where, like, the Melbourne International Comedy Festival has had, at least anecdotally, I know a lot of comedians are saying that ticket sales are down, and then, yeah, people not coming when they have tickets. I'm also in the metal scene, which is the most popular style of music in the city. But the number of gigs every weekend that have to either stop or entire bands pull out because one person has COVID is extraordinary. And these venues are struggling because of that, because people don't come because their favourite band's not playing and all the rest of that. And I don't think the solution to a pandemic is to ease restrictions further and further and further, because as we saw at the airports recently, this disease lays people out. And even when you have, you've gotten rid of close contact isolation, people are still going to get very sick and they're not going to be able to work. And that's going to hit the entertainment sector continuously. Performer gets sick or front of house crew gets sick, then the show can't go ahead. And that has a massive impact on, in venues and the cultural vibe of the city. We're not back to normal. We're just trying our best to power through what is still definitely a very dangerous pandemic.
Noel, you've got a wonderful job. I'm very envious of it. You get to go around this city and talk to restaurateurs and talk to people who are working in hospitality and in small businesses and sort of make some prognostications. And you wrote an article a little while back that says it'll be 2 decades before the CBD of Melbourne is back to where it was. Why did you say that?
That was based on a bit of research by a KPMG economist called Harry Rawnsley, well-respected guy, and he basically calculated that in terms of visitor numbers, in terms of the amount of workers, students, shoppers, visitors on the streets of Melbourne every day, were basically at somewhere around mid-noughties level, and early noughties on a bad day. Now,
So we're about 20 years. Taken
Correct.
20 years back
So
to the sorts of visitor numbers you would have seen.
That's right. Now,
And you certainly see it here in the city. You know, you talk to a cafe owner who would have had, 13,000 people coming past, coming to work and going home, and now they've maybe got 1,300, and maybe that's only Tuesday to Thursday, because it seems another part of your reporting was that that's when people are coming to the city, and they sort of have settled into this trend of working from home Monday, Friday.
That's right. They call them the twats because they show up on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday.
The twats. Oh, to be a twat.
I'm not quite a twat because I show up on Friday.
Right.
But it's a clear pattern. Certainly, and it was certainly very clearly established when the work from home recommendation was lifted, and the mask mandate, which was really keeping people out of the office, was lifted. So we've seen the numbers improve here in the CBD. Where the March occupancy numbers for offices was about 42%. Okay, and that stark difference: Monday dead, Friday dead, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday quite busy. That's eased out a little bit, but it's still there. The other thing that we're seeing in the city, and this is encouraging because not all the signs are encouraging, it's a very mixed picture, is that people are showing up in the city to play. Obviously, the live performance sector is a struggle. Restaurateurs, pubs, they're quite positive, they're quite upbeat, and we sort of assumed throughout the pandemic that if people weren't coming into work, they wouldn't come into play. That hasn't quite played out. So when you talk to restaurateurs and to pub owners and managers and what have you, their biggest problem isn't that they can't get their customers through the door because the doors are shut by order of the state government. Their biggest problem now is staff.
Yeah.
Talking to a guy in the coffee industry this morning, if you're lucky enough to hire a skilled barista, which is difficult, he reckons you're going to pay upwards of $30 an hour. Pre-pandemic, that was like $25 an hour. He's got 6 vacancies in his business because he roasts and he wholesales, and he's got cafes as well. Not many takers for them.
Yes.
And he go back to 2019, he had 1 vacancy and 39 applicants.
For that one vacancy.
Yes, he is desperate to get that international flow of people.
And Toby, you do see that when you walk up and down Lygon Street as a little experiment night before last. Lots of empty tables, but you can't get a seat.
Exactly right. Staffing's a real problem. As you're saying, I've got mates who are restaurateurs and people who run events companies, and they're paying people to wash dishes on a public holiday $75 an hour.
Are they really?
They are. And they're giving out $1,000 bonuses to people who take jobs. In Sydney, it's $2,000 in some places. It's outrageous the amount of money. These are businesses that have had it so hard for so long. They've had stop and start. They've gone broke. People like Chris Lucas in town here has invested tens of millions of dollars in new venues, and then the government said, nope, you can't start. Nope, you've got to stop now. Now you've got to stop. The supply chain of supply of vegetables and fruits and meats and everything, that's increased their prices. Staff costs have gone up, but you can't increase your price to the punters, otherwise you'll turn them off. It's been an awful industry. I'm very glad I'm not in it. It's been a tough industry. But bookings are beginning to pick up now, but staff is the real problem, and not just in hospitality.
Pricing is an interesting phenomena too, because we're not seeing like you'd expect to see if in a really struggling sector facing sort of recessionary environment, people aren't discounting, and people aren't putting on menu specials and all you can eats and all the type of sort of hospitality behaviour that you see. When
they are, or they aren't.
They're not.
Right.
They're not. The people want to come and eat. That is not the problem. The problem is
getting the
staff. Logistics of allowing them to eat, allowing them to consume your product.
I was interested to see, Nyadol, that people are starting to come back to the city, but people are starting to spend a little bit more on goods and services, but they're tending to do it more where they live. But when you get to the outer suburbs, there's a lower rate of increase, if you like, in that expenditure compared to the middle ring suburbs around Melbourne. What do you think accounts for that?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know, but if you allow me, I can pick up on something that another panelist said. And it's around getting stuff. I don't want to answer something I don't know.
Sure. I love that about you.
It's around getting more staff to come and work in, and maybe not getting the staff. And you mentioned a comment about people forking out money far more than they will pay in the past, and I'm wondering why is that necessarily a bad thing, right? Because I think that we tend to speak most of the time because in a very perhaps, but also paying people a good wage is a good thing, and maybe part of what the pandemic is going to do is try to balance that. I think the challenge we're facing, picking from your comment, it shows the sort of almost the shallowness of our solidarity, right? We live in a society that is so sort of market-friendly and market-focused, to use the word of Michael Sandel, that we measure what is socially good by economic terms, the rate of unemployment or GDP. But doesn't tell us much about the dignity of work. It doesn't tell us much about how people feel when they turn up to work and whether they feel valued or not.
Or indeed the rates of youth unemployment, which is still very high.
And when you think about the society we're living now, with high inequality, very high inequality, housing unaffordability, increase in insecure work, being told all these economic measures doesn't actually tell you what individuals are going through. And so part of the quickness to conform to a market-friendly society is exactly one of the reasons why we'll rather listen to economists, no offense, instead of to people who, to medical, to doctors or people warning us that it might be too soon to open up, because now we must sort of meet these economic measures to feel as if we're doing some social good. And that's the thing that I had hoped that perhaps with the pandemic, we would have revisited some of those assumptions and tried to rebalance the conversation, not just around, employers, which is good, or the economy, but around people as well and the kind of lives that they're living.
I mean, Melbourne's always been a town that migrants come to, Noel, and people might start off in Sydney and then come to Melbourne, find community in Melbourne. And all the demographers will say if Melbourne is to continue to find its rightful place as the most significant city in this country, the largest city in this country, its proper place in Australia's federation, that what it needs to do is to continue to encourage people to come. Now, one of the big issues is that those young people who want to try their hand here are not coming. And we're seeing hospitality companies go around the world and actually going to the Middle East, going all over Europe, going to Africa and saying, could you please come to Australia, and actually tapping people on the shoulder. Why isn't that starting back again, the backpackers, the young seekers of a new life?
I think we're certainly seeing green shoots there. I mean, I was down in Lorne on the Great Ocean Road, which is a place where, if it wasn't for backpacker labour in non-pandemic times, the holiday economy simply couldn't function, because you couldn't get the workforce to service the massive influx of people from the posh eastern suburbs here in Melbourne who come in and want to eat and drink and all the rest of it. And the backpackers were back. That was a very clear takeout for me. Spanish accents, German accents. That was great. That's anecdotal. We're not seeing large numbers coming through in the data that we see out of the immigration department and all the rest of it. I think we're also hearing, and again it's anecdotal, that a lot of people who are here on 457 visas, and where we went from before times into pandemic, were disgusted by their treatment. They weren't allowed access to any of the income support that permanent residents or citizens, obviously, overseas students were in terrible strife.
And
so
has that created a problem for Australia to attract those sorts of people here?
I think it's too early to say.
Okay.
Because remember, the borders haven't been open for that long.
Yes.
It's going to take time for the word to get around that Australia is open for business. It's going to take time for word to get around that you can get paid $75 an hour for washing dishes in the back of a restaurant. Once it does, I'm confident that people will come, because I don't think that Australia and Melbourne have lost any of the things that have always made them such a magnet. It's a good life here, you know, economically, but in all sorts of ways, it's a good life socially.
Yeah.
And those fundamentals haven't changed.
Well, speaking of which, Melbourne has for some years claimed the status of the world's most livable city. But no longer. Last year, after all those lockdowns, it slipped to 8th position on The Economist magazine's Livability Index. But is that right or fair? How are communities responding to the changes? We asked Nyadol to pop down the road to her local shopping area, Ian Street in Noble Park. It's in Melbourne's southeastern suburbs in the electorate of Bruce, which is a marginal seat currently held by Labor.
Welcome to one of my favourite places in Melbourne, Ian Street. Ian Street is where you find all the things you thought you left behind, and I think that's why we call it Little South Sudan. I'm going to be introducing you to some of the people working here, living here, and bringing Ian Street to life. So come along with me. Hello. How are you? I used to come here all the time to get my hair cut, but I haven't been here because of COVID, and I notice it's not as busy as it used to be.
As you see now, we have more than 2 hours, not even one customer. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's hard to survive into. I find like Melbourne the best place to be. Yeah, before COVID. But after COVID, it's hard. Many people like they moved from Melbourne, you know?
It's good to see that the restrictions are coming down. I'll be coming back more often because I don't think I'll be growing my hair anytime soon, so more haircuts. So Hida is a long-term friend. We started a lot of community engagement together in our early 20s, I think.
Yep.
What do you think are some of the still ongoing challenges that are happening?
Well, employment is one of them, and you can see there's some of them around the car parks here hanging around because most of them, you know, they finished their studies, but because there's no job, they apply, there's nothing, so they have to hang around here. Unless you know someone, then through someone you can get a job.
Yeah.
So if you don't have anybody behind you or supporting you, someone from around the Australian community, it's very difficult to get a job.
This is the first shop, the first South Sudanese shop, I think, to ever pop up on Ian Street and probably around this area. And it's one of the places you come to find things that, as I mentioned, you thought you've left home, and this happens to be one of my kids' favorites. It takes about 15 minutes to cook, so also quite efficient. Hello, Noel, how are you? How is business?
Business is back to normal.
How long has this been going on? How long have you been doing this business for?
I've been doing the business for the last 15 years now.
How have things changed for your business, but also just generally living around Noble Park?
80% of the goods is imported, so it really affected us, and we have to put the price up, and customers were complaining, but people are getting used to that.
How have you been? You know, it's been really tough with COVID and the lockdown and everything.
Actually, it was really very hard, like single mothers as well.
Yeah.
It's hard to work by yourself, looking after children. A lot of changes.
What are some of the good ones?
The women are doing well. Ladies are buying houses.
I know. I love that. I love the fact that
Ladies
they're
are
buying
doing a
homes.
lot of things.
Yeah.
And I'm really very happy with them.
I'm very proud of them too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Always good seeing you. Thank you. You have a good day. All right. Enough shopping for a lifetime, but the best thing is the food.
Did you enjoy doing that? That looked wonderful.
It was fun.
Yeah.
I know a lot of those people, so it was just fun talking to them.
It was lovely to see you in your community talking about their experiences of COVID and the good and the bad and all the rest of it. Yeah, yeah.
It was good.
How has that community come through COVID? Talk to me about that, because so many people, like there's some extraordinary statistic, Nyadol, 60,000 people left Melbourne. You know, maybe they went to other parts of Australia, but it got tough to live here for a while.
Yeah, it was, but I think the best thing about Sudanese community is that we've we come from a very collectivist society. So when COVID hit, part of the challenge about sort of limiting transmission was the fact that people still wanted to care for others. But at the same time, it meant that, people who needed food had food. People will cook and leave the food at your door and they will look after you. So there was such a sense of community and helping each other out, which was really good. But that's just a characteristic of the community I come from. So it was wonderful to see that. And then I think what was challenging was just seeing all the small businesses that were starting out struggling. And in that clip, I talked to this wonderful lady called, Nunu. She's called Mama Nunu. And at the end, she sort of slaps me out of the shop because I had just turned up and said, can you answer some questions? And she wanted to be, prepared. So, but, and talking to her about her business, she's done a couple of different things before becoming a hairdresser. And she's run that business now for 2-3 years. And also talking to the first shop owner at Ian Street, and he's the one who sort of was able to bring all these things that we thought we left behind. And I love going there and shopping. But the best thing about Ian Street, despite sort of COVID, is you get to see the mechanics of the sort of South Sudanese community happening on that street, because everybody is there. That's where they get their kids' haircut. That's where they do their shopping. So you get to see everybody and smile and laugh and hug and seeing life come back again in the way it is attempting to across, the state of Victoria after those all heavy lockdowns. So it was really joyful to do it too.
Yeah. Thank you for doing it. It was lovely. Toby, you did a band in Melbourne, as I recall.
Absolutely.
Yes, you got out of Dodge.
I did. I was up on the Gold Coast for 5 months, I think, while everyone here was being locked up and miserable. I was strolling on the beach and having fun.
Yes, and telling everybody about it, as I recall.
Yeah, I was, and I upset a lot of people, as is my habit. In
terms of Melbourne's livability now?
Melbourne is a very livable city, and it'll get back up. Different governments have taken different approaches to how they handle COVID. The Victorian government has been about the most austere in the world, I think, one of the most, and it's gutted a lot of businesses. It's induced quite a lot of depression, and it's had some efficacy. But the place will rebalance. Melbourne's a vibrant place of 5 million people. It'll get back up, and it'll be a strong, fun place to be. Whether it's high on the livability index, who cares? It's going to be a nice place to be, and I'll spend plenty of time here.
Mitch, you noted that a lot of people in the art scene were decamping to Brisbane, where you're from, and Adelaide.
Yeah, it's and to a lesser degree Tasmania as well. Partly, at least in my scenes, everyone who wants to try and make it, as misguided as it might be, comes to Melbourne for the most part. And
to do what?
Either comedy, music, things like that. And so when the first lockdowns hit, a lot of people just sort of went, I'm going back home. And they might not have moved in with their parents again, but they moved back to cities that were familiar to them. And I think Melbourne will rebalance and rebound, but I also think it's a pretty cool opportunity for places like Brisbane and Adelaide to almost like catch up in the art sector and catch up culturally, because now they've got a whole lot of artists that still want to create and do things, but they've put down roots in Brisbane again.
And you never thought of doing that?
No, I love it here. Like, I had no problem with the lockdowns either, like talking about, strolling on the beach at the Gold Coast. It's also full of people on the Gold Coast, and so that's not worth it to me. But I come from there, I can say it. I liked Melbourne, and, me and my friends spent a lot of time inside before the pandemic, so that was just a slight change of pace watching everyone else deal with it. So I was okay with it. I totally understand why a lot of people wouldn't have been, but there was never a question for me that after all of the lockdowns and after the pandemic getting back to normal, that I wouldn't be in Melbourne, for better or worse, I think. Again, we're not at the top of the livability index. I don't care. I personally find it livable, and the people still here, by and large, still find it livable.
One of the key issues that your reporting has thrown up is, Noel, that it's really a landlord's market in Australia. And I read the statistics for available rental accommodation, And in the outer suburbs, it's 0.4%, is that right? Of available rental properties are vacant and ready to be rented. And that about 2% in the middle suburbs and about 1.5% in Melbourne proper. But that's actually pretty good compared to the other capital cities.
That is pretty good.
I'm not sure that makes Melbourne livable, but just more livable than other places if you're trying to rent.
Well, it is, and that's a function of the pandemic. So let's take the CBD, for example, where things got pretty extreme with overseas students and various other non-residents pretty much vanished overnight. And
so you had about a year ago about 11% occupancy in the CBC.
Yeah. And that's down to 1.5% now. So there's been a snapback. But it's interesting. It tells a story about livability through the pandemic. Just on the old livability there, we're still number 9 on this global index. It's pretty respectable. But I think, that pause to the breakneck speed of population growth that we've seen over the past few years, and indeed throwing it back into reverse for a little bit, which I don't expect to last. I think we're going to be back into positive territory very soon. That's helped livability in this town no end. I mean, rentals is just one aspect of it. The work from home thing has, if you're lucky enough to work from home, not everybody is, I'm not suggesting that for a moment, but that's taken so much pressure off transport.
And like almost everywhere, Victoria's Big Build, I mean, there's a website dedicated to how the big build might affect your commute to work or what roads are closed and all the rest of it. You can put in where you live and you can see all the big build around you. So you've got your infrastructure catching up with that massive sprawl that was occurring pre-COVID.
Which was desperately needed. So being top of the livability index is great for bragging rights over Sydney, but it didn't really affect many people's lived experience here in this town. Certainly, it had nothing to do with Noble Park and nothing to do with the outer suburbs where things were getting really squeezed. You couldn't get a rental.
But that's pretty squeezed, isn't it? That you still can't get a rental.
Yeah,
in your reporting, people were saying you got domestic violence, women and children escaping domestic violence who then can't get into affordable accommodation in the outer suburbs, et cetera, et cetera. You've got all those sorts of flow-on effects as a result of that.
Well, I'm not trying to suggest that the pandemic has cured all our ills, but rental rates haven't snapped back to what they were pre-pandemic. So that is an easing, I suppose, of some of those real pressures that we're starting to build. Particularly in the outer suburbs. And as I was saying earlier on, look. Things are looking positive for the recovery. Lots of challenges in different sectors, and it's a patchy picture in many ways. But I think we might look back at this period of time. Hopefully, we can call it the post-pandemic period, and look at it as an opportunity for a bit of a reset for those things that the livability index was masking about what was wrong with this town.
A couple of quick questions I have to ask, Nyadol. If nobody can find workers in hospitality, 28,000 they need in hospitality in this state, why are young Australians with a South Sudanese background struggling to get work?
I don't know. And I'm not sure whether I want to cop the Twitter pylon by answering it anyway.
But I found that notable that they were saying you've got to know somebody to get it. These are kids who want to work, but they've got to know someone to give them a shot.
It's not even young people. There are single mothers in my community who are leaving Melbourne to go and work in Alice Springs so that they can get work. And they're in Alice Springs working 2-3 jobs, and that's how, in the comment, they were able to afford housing. So
because they'll get a shot there.
Yeah, because they'll get a shot there because, here sometimes you get this requirement that you need to have previous experience, and if you're a migrant, you've never worked anywhere in Australia, there's no previous experience. You sometimes need the connection to get work. There's issues of discrimination potentially. So it's tough, but I don't think it's also about, Sudanese Australian. I think we look at their unemployment rate as low, but there's still a lot of people that are underemployed, either working casually or not. So I think the unemployment rate at some point just, again, masks things as opposed to reveals.
I'm going to give you the last word, and we've only got about 30 seconds, but I love that you said you wouldn't live anywhere else in Australia.
I wouldn't live anywhere else in Australia. But for me, Melbourne too is the first place that felt like home. When I landed in Australia and gave that passport to the immigration officer, and she said, "Welcome home." This was the place that felt like home. So there is a very personal connection to Melbourne for me. So yeah, I go to other states, they look nice, but I'm glad to come home.
A wonderful final word. That is all we have time for. Thank you all for coming in. To Toby Ralph, to Nyadol Nyuon, to Noel Towell and Mitch Alexander. Have a wonderful evening. John Barron will be back with you tomorrow night. Good night.